The film starts with a man named Kim who stopped working as a doctor because he felt guilty about the death of his younger brother. One day, Kim met a woman named Dongju, who worked as a funeral attendant and could talk to spirits. With Dongju's help, Kim was able to find out who was responsible for his brother's death and was able to return to his normal life. Dongju works in a place that people think is scary because it's the only way she can protect herself from bad luck. The scene then shows Kim introducing himself as the owner of a business called Dunkbae. Kim, along with his friend Vincent, can do any job for very little money. Sometimes, Kim also helps people study for the bar exam and even works as a detective to fight for justice. One day, Kim got a job from Byung-soo to deliver a message to Byung-soo's girlfriend, whom he hadn't seen in a long time. At a cafe, Kim met the woman, and it turned out to be Dongju. At that time, Dongju was happy to meet her boyfriend again, but when she read the message, she was sad because it was a breakup message. She got mad at Kim for bringing such bad news. Dongju then hired Kim to deliver a kick message to his girlfriend for 50,000 won. However, Kim refused because his business didn't use violence or disrespectful methods. Because of the kick, Kim's leg got swollen, and he couldn't work for a few days. Kim thought about reporting this to the police. The scene then shows Dongju as a table tennis athlete. One day, she sprained her leg and had to stop playing. So, she applied for a job as a funeral director. The manager asked why she wanted to work in such a different job. Dongju said she wanted a job she could do for at least 40 years without retiring. Dongju's first job at the funeral home was very hard. She had to take care of a boy's body. While putting lotion on the body, she was shocked because the boy suddenly came back to life. The room also changed into a peaceful place with dim light. At that time, she didn't know she had a special ability to talk to people from another world. Soon after, Dongju left the funeral home and went back to her father's house because she was scared. Her father had to take her to a temple to calm down because Dongju thought spirits were bothering her. Her father told her not to go back to the funeral home. While in the library, Dongju kept hearing a mysterious voice calling her name. Every time she tried to forget about it and live a normal life, something bad would happen to her. Feeling like she was always unlucky, Dongju talked to a priest to find a solution. The priest told her that if she wanted to live peacefully, she had to go back to the funeral home because many spirits needed her help. These spirits had their own stories and reasons for reaching out to her. When Dongju said she didn't have any special talent, she had a small accident and had to go to the hospital. She felt sad about her life and the special talent she was given. Not wanting to continue having bad luck, Dongju decided to go back to the funeral home. Day by day, Dongju did her job at the funeral home. She became braver when dealing with the bodies of both men and women. When she talked to them, Dongju often felt moved by their last wishes that hadn't been told to their families. One time, Dongju put makeup on an old woman who wanted to look pretty when she died. This old woman was the 5th person Dongju helped send to the afterlife, and there were still many more she needed to help. Now, after Yunhee died, Dongju had to help 15 more bodies before her bad luck and curse would completely end. One evening, Kim was enjoying food at a small shop. He saw many business cards offering services, so he put down his own business card with the shop owner's permission. Not far from there, a man in a black suit was eating quickly after getting a call. This man seemed to be a regular customer at the shop. The next day, the story shows an online taxi. After dropping off some passengers, the car gets into an accident and the driver dies. The driver's body is taken to the funeral home where Dongju works. At that time, Dongju can talk to the spirit of the driver, whose name is Junho. There, Junho tells Dongju his last wish was to find his son who has been missing for more than 20 years. In the past, Junho had to leave his son with his half-brother because he needed to go on a 3-month sailing trip. But his half-brother didn't take care of Junho's son and left him at a station. When Junho came back, he couldn't find his son. There, Junho said that his son had a scar on his hand from being burned by hot water. Dongju thought this wasn't her problem to solve. However, when Junho's half-brother, Sang-duk, came to the funeral only to get Junho's death insurance money, Dongju changed her mind. She felt she had to find Junho's son, so he could come to his father's funeral. Soon after, Dongju wrote announcements and put them in front of the funeral home and other places, hoping someone would recognize Junho's son. She also posted a photo of the boy that she had on her phone. But there, Sang-duk left the funeral home, not caring about the funeral. The next day, Dongju was surprised when she saw a man crying in front of Junho's burial room. Dongju was sure that this man was Junho's long-lost son. It turns out that the night before, Kim got a job to be a substitute mourner at Junho's funeral. This job was given by Sang-duk's wife, and she paid Kim 1 million won. Strangely, Kim seemed sad, as if he knew Junho. Kim even called Vincent about the sad news. Dongju treated Kim kindly, thinking he was really Junho's son. But Kim was just doing the job he was hired for. When Kim saw Dongju again, he remembered meeting her at the cafe a few days ago. This caused a misunderstanding because Kim thought Dongju had hired him to be the substitute mourner. Meanwhile, Dongju's father, Mr. Beck, who owns a small bag shop, was worried because it was late at night and Dongju had not come home yet. Dongju told her father that she was studying in a group for the civil service exam. The next day, Kim, thinking his job was done, said goodbye to Dongju. But Dongju stopped him, thinking it was too soon for a son to leave his father's funeral. When Kim tried to show proof of his job on his phone, the battery died. Dongju became even more convinced that Kim was Junho's son because he had a burn scar on his left hand. At that time, Kim was confused because he had no relationship with Junho, even though he seemed sad. Soon after, Kim left the funeral home even though Dongju tried to convince him to stay. But suddenly, he decided to come back and take Junho's body to the cemetery. This made Dongju even more sure that Kim was Junho's son because he changed his mind so quickly. At that time, Kim used Junho's taxi, driven by his colleague. Inside the taxi, he found a photo of Junho's son, who disappeared when he was little. Dongju thought Kim was the boy in the photo, now all grown up. Shortly after, Dongju invited Kim to lunch to tell him Junho's last message, which was his apology and regret for not finding his son before he died. Dongju also wanted to know about the life insurance Kim was entitled to. After Dongju left, Kim saw a man in a yellow car who had been following them. This man was the real Junho's son, Ganwoo. There, Ganwoo showed a photo of himself as a boy, which Junho had kept in his taxi. Ganwoo felt sad remembering what his uncle had told him that Junho had left him on purpose because he didn't want to take care of him anymore. This made Ganwoo angry and disappointed with his father. He hoped Junho would suffer like he did growing up alone. Ganwoo was actually the last passenger Junho carried before the tragic accident. At that time, Ganwoo didn't reveal his true identity to his father because he wanted to forget about him. But he felt tears in his eyes when he heard Junho say he missed eating with his son. Now, Ganwoo felt regret because Junho was gone forever. He wished he could put together a photo of them from 20 years ago before they were separated. After Junho died, Dongju still had 14 more bodies to help. She sent a message to Kim, telling him he needed to do a DNA test to get the insurance money. However, Kim, tired of Dongju's guesses, confirmed over the phone that Junho's real son had appeared. 8 years ago, Kim met Junho in a shop without knowing who he was. Junho kindly helped Kim pay for his food when Kim forgot his wallet. This made Kim sad because he remembered Junho's kindness and hadn't had a chance to repay him. Back to the present, some time had passed, and Kim visited a place where the ashes of a recently deceased child were stored. There, he met Mr. Beck, who was praying for his late wife. Since there was no public transportation, Kim offered Mr. Beck a ride home. They talked about their lives, and Mr. Beck mentioned that it had been exactly 20 years since his wife died. Later, Kim stopped at a tavern. He met a man who worked as a driver but was drunk. Feeling compassionate, Kim helped him by driving him home. The man, unaware of his surroundings, babbled about a check in his jacket worth 100 million won. Fortunately, Kim was a good person and had no bad intentions. A friend of Dongju advised her to tell her father the truth about her job at the funeral home. But Dongju said she would tell him after autumn arrived. The next day, Mr. Beck was excited to prepare lunch for Dongju because it was her 25th birthday. He remembered his wife passing away shortly after Dongju was born. Meanwhile, Dongju didn't care much about her birthday. She finally took a special birthday dish with her. Unfortunately, on the way to work, she had an accident with Kim, which caused her lunch to spill on the street. They argued and yelled at each other, causing a scene that people around them noticed. They then realized that Dongju had hired Kim before but was disappointed because Kim didn't do a good job with her ex-boyfriend. This argument hurt Kim's business, making him lose customers quickly. But Vincent scolded him and told him to fix the situation and apologize to Dongju. Kim struggled to find Dongju because he didn't know where she lived. He called her to apologize and return her 50,000 won, but Dongju didn't respond. One day, while posting job flyers, Kim met Mr. Beck, who was working as an apartment security guard. Besides owning a small bag shop, Mr. Beck worked part-time without Dongju knowing. That's how Kim found out that Mr. Beck was Dongju's father and that it was her birthday. Realizing he had ruined her special day, Kim decided to disguise himself as a clown bear that evening to give Dongju a message. When Dongju got home, she read a letter that made her happy and found a birthday cake in the refrigerator. The cake was a gift from Kim. After celebrating her birthday and blowing out the candles with her father, Dongju felt much better. She was kind to Kim, replied to his apology, and promised to meet him. The next day, Dongju was helping the spirit of a man named Sukshul. There, he asked her to go to his house and find a check in a box to give to his wife. At the same time, Kim got a job cleaning the house of someone who had just died. Kim realized it was the same man he had helped home a few days ago when he was very drunk. Sukshul's family was worried because he died without leaving any money. Kim remembered the man saying he had a check for 100 million won in his pocket. When he went to clean Sukshul's room, he was surprised to find Dongju hiding in the cupboard. Dongju asked Kim to keep her presence a secret and explained that she had no bad intentions. When the chance came, while Sukshul's family was out of the house, Dongju explained that she was only looking for a white box but didn't say why it was important. Suddenly, the homeowner scolded Kim again because the house was messy with plants knocked over. At that moment, Kim kept Dongju's presence a secret and promised to fix everything. Luckily, Dongju found the check. She then asked Kim to give it to Sukshul's family. The two women in the family cried when they saw the check, realizing Sukshul had cared for them by saving money for their future. Kim thought it was strange that Dongju knew about the check. Meanwhile, Dongju visited a priest who was actually her uncle. They talked about how the priest had recently met Mr. Beck, who hadn't found a new partner since Dongju's mother died. There, Dongju asked her uncle to keep their meeting a secret from her father. Over time, because of Kim's hard work and promotions, his job services business started getting lots of orders, which Kim hadn't expected. One day, Vincent counted their earnings, which were 800,000 won for the day. Vincent thought Kim played a big role in their success and decided Kim deserved to be a director in their office. One night, Kim invited Dongju to have dinner together. Kim showed his ID card to prove he wasn't the son of the person Dongju helped at the funeral home. They became closer that night. The next day, Dongju said goodbye to her father and told him she was going to a study group. In reality, she worked at the funeral home, which was visited by some officials that day. The manager showed the officials the different rooms available for mourners, including the mortuary. Meanwhile, Mr. Beck was working as an apartment security guard. He gave Kim a watermelon as a thank you because Kim had given him a cake that Dongju really liked. At that time, Mr. Beck had a night shift scheduled in a few days, but he hadn't told Dongju about his new job. When Dongju came home dressed all in black, her father asked why, since she had said she was meeting friends. As the day goes by, Dongju was finding it harder to keep her job a secret from her father. Meanwhile, Dongju saw an advertisement for a small house for rent and got interested. She asked her father for permission, saying she wanted to focus on studying and have more time to discuss with her friends. Although he was a bit hesitant, Mr. Beck allowed Dongju to move because it would also make it easier for him to do his night shifts as a security guard. The house Dongju wanted to rent was in the same complex as Kim's house, which was also his workplace. Unfortunately, when Dongju arrived at her new place, Kim had already left to start his day offering cheap work services. Only Vincent and a policeman greeted and helped Dongju with her things. Turns out, the policeman fell in love with Dongju because of her beauty and friendly attitude. Sometime later, Dongju was given the task of taking care of the body of a pregnant woman named Mrs. Gung. In the past, Mrs. Gung was killed by robbers who broke into her house. Her husband was very sad and blamed himself for leaving his wife just to buy apples. Dongju couldn't hold back her tears when she touched Mrs. Gung and communicated with her. Mrs. Gung was very sad about her death, especially because her baby, who was supposed to be born in 2 days, couldn't be saved. For the last time, Mrs. Gung wanted to hear her husband's voice, so she asked Dongju to call him. At the same time, Kim was given the task of delivering food to the husband from local residents. Kim was also asked to bring food to Dongju, who was in a room downstairs. Because of this, Dongju missed the last words Mrs. Gung wanted to say, and the room returned to normal. Mrs. Gung worried that her husband might end his life. To avoid any confusion, Dongju explained to Kim that she could communicate with spirits. In that moment, Kim didn't believe her and left, thinking Dongju was crazy. Meanwhile, Mrs. Gung's husband was still very sad and refused to eat, making him weak. The funeral ceremony was scheduled for the next day. With no support from family, since he was an orphan, Mrs. Gung's husband decided to leave the funeral home. Dongju and her manager panicked when they realized he was missing. After 10 hours, he hadn't returned, and the funeral home had to postpone the ceremony. Soon after, Dongju went back to her boarding house, where she was greeted by Vincent, who introduced her to Kim. They were both surprised to see each other after the incident at the funeral home. Feeling uncomfortable, Dongju decided to move out because she didn't want to be neighbors with Kim. She then met the priest at the church and prayed for guidance on where Mrs. Gung's husband might be. Dongju then checked the couple's house. While there, the neighbors grew suspicious of her. A police officer named Haeun talked to Dongju about her job and told her not to go to dangerous areas, especially since the police hadn't found any clues yet. Dongju kept thinking about what Mrs. Gung had said. While eating at a shop, Dongju accidentally saw Kim. Kim, still annoyed, ignored her. Dongju explained again that she wasn't crazy, but had the ability to convey messages from spirits. She blamed Kim because his arrival had stopped Mrs. Gung from saying her last message. Dongju thought Kim was always following her. Then, she decided to stay temporarily at her friend's table tennis club. Dongju was so restless that she couldn't sleep. Her friend suggested she should honestly tell her father about her job. Dongju called her father, who was on a night shift at his job. They both lied to each other about what they were really facing. On the second day of Mrs. Gung's husband's disappearance, hundreds of police officers had searched every river in the city. Kim received a message about a body found under a bridge. Luckily, it wasn't Mrs. Gung's husband. Kim felt guilty about what Dongju had said earlier, but when he asked Haeun for updates, there were none. Kim told Haeun he was concerned because he was a neighbor. At the funeral home, the manager told Dongju that the funeral couldn't be postponed any longer because the set date had passed. However, Dongju still believed that Mrs. Gung's husband would come to say goodbye to his wife. While driving, Kim heard a radio broadcast about Mrs. Gung and her husband. The broadcast revealed that they were both abandoned by their parents and left under a bridge when they were young. Before the robbery, Mrs. Gung had written a story to send to the radio as a gift for the birth of her child. Then, Mrs. Gung starts her story from when she and her husband met as teenagers and promised to take care of each other. They were excited about the birth of their child because it would make their family complete. From the story, Kim realized that Mrs. Gung's husband was likely at the bridge where they had their first kiss. His suspicion was confirmed when he saw Mrs. Gung's husband teetering on the edge, ready to end his life. Just in time, Kim stopped him by saying that Mrs. Gung had sent a last message. The message was that if she could be reincarnated, she would still love him and repay all his kindness. Dongju had asked the radio announcer to read Mrs. Gung's story on the day their child was supposed to be born, hoping her husband would hear it and reconsider. However, the announcer, unaware of Mrs. Gung's death, wished their family happiness. At that time, Kim convinced Mrs. Gung's husband that what he was doing was wrong. He then took him to the funeral home so he could close his wife's casket and see her one last time. One night, Kim remembered a boy named Junho. At that moment, Kim felt guilty for Junho's death because he failed to save him after an accident. This happened several months ago when Kim was still a doctor. However, why Kim suddenly changed his profession remains a mystery. At her new boarding house, Dongju looks at a ring she got from a market near her home. It turns out to be Junho's ring. 3 months ago, while Dongju was working, Junho had asked her to find the ring he left at that place. Even though she found it, she still keeps it because she hasn't been able to find Junho's family, who had moved according to his neighbors. On the other hand, Dongju talked to her uncle who was a pastor about this unfinished request. There, he comforted her, saying she had done a lot, including searching for information from companies and different communities. But there, Dongju worried that Kim might reveal her secret of being able to talk to spirits. Unexpectedly, while going home, she met Kim, who again mentioned her abilities at the funeral home. Feeling uncomfortable with always being followed, Dongju considered quitting her job as a funeral attendant. The next day, Dongju went back to work as usual. When she was about to explain why she wanted to resign, she had to deliver the body of an elderly woman. A family member told Dongju that the woman loved sunflowers. Happy to help, Dongju decided to choose a suitable nursery for the flowers. The next day, Vincent blamed Kim for Dongju moving out of the boarding house. Haeun was also annoyed because he had wanted to express his feelings to Dongju but now had no chance to get close to her. Then, while working his job, Kim ran into Mr. Beck, who was taking photos of blooming flowers. Mr. Beck said he would send the photo to his daughter, who he thought was studying for exams in a place called Noryangjin. Meanwhile, Dongju saw Kim talking with her manager in front of the funeral home. She suspected that Kim was going to reveal her secret to the manager. To prevent this, she wrote a resignation letter. However, Kim told manager Il-sab to ignore Dongju's resignation letter because there was a misunderstanding. Upon hearing that, manager Il-sab advised Kim to apologize to Dongju sincerely. Kim then looked for Dongju at her new boarding house, but it was empty, and her cell phone was not active. At a crossroads, Kim met Dongju and apologized, asking her to return to Vincent's boarding house, which was a better place to live. Their relationship grew closer when Dongju realized that Kim genuinely cared about her. Arriving in front of Vincent's boarding house, Dongju learned that Kim had played a big role in saving Mrs. Gung's husband when he was about to end his life. There, Kim showed his care for Dongju by giving her warm food, and he also enjoyed the same meal in his own room. The next day, while taking care of another body, Dongju met a young woman who worked as a doctor and was helping a homeless man who had a stroke. Dongju admired this woman for her strong social spirit. She thought the family of the deceased was very kind because they gave her food and gifts as thanks. However, it turned out that the woman, who was one of the relatives, actually thought poorly of Dongju because she worked with dead bodies. Kim found this out when he was delivering lunch. Seeing Dongju's hurt feelings, Kim tried to get her out of the room to comfort her. But Dongju wanted to be alone because this was the first time she had received such a bad reaction from a client. The day after the funeral ceremony, Dongju was still upset about the insults she had received from her client's family. Kim was waiting for her in front of the funeral home and wanted to take her home and treat her to a meal. There, he encouraged Dongju, saying her job was extraordinary. Soon after, they ate and drank together until Dongju couldn't walk home. Because of that, Kim had to carry Dongju to her front door. Seeing that she had fallen asleep, he put her to bed. Because he had also been drinking, Kim couldn't resist his drowsiness and fell asleep next to her until morning. When Dongju woke up, she panicked and asked if anything inappropriate had happened. Hearing that, Kim assured her that nothing had happened. Meanwhile, after hearing Dongju scream, Haeun tried to break down the door, worried something was wrong. Shortly after, Kim came out of Dongju's room, but had to leave quickly because Vincent kept calling him, wondering why he didn't come home. Vincent then punished Kim by making him clean his place. As the day goes by, Dongju started to like Kim because he was not only handsome but also very caring. One day, Dongju got a call from her father, who was worried because she hadn't come home as promised. Knowing her father was coming to the tutoring place, Dongju asked Kim to help her bring a change of clothes and meet her there. Luckily, she quickly saw her father already at the tutoring place. Shortly after, Kim arrived with a change of clothes for Dongju, as she didn't want her father to see her in all black. While in the bathroom, Mr. Beck caught them together and assumed they were in a relationship. There, Kim said he was also attending the same tutoring sessions as Dongju. Soon after, they continued chatting at a restaurant. At that moment, Kim felt very awkward because he had to hide Dongju's job as a funeral attendant from her father. At the same time, he also had to keep Mr. Beck's job as a security guard a secret. Kim even helped Mr. Beck when he got a call from a work colleague, making sure Mr. Beck didn't suspect anything about Dongju's real job. Mr. Beck then left and told Dongju to take care of herself, and Dongju was relieved her secret was safe. On the bus ride home, Kim asked Dongju why she chose to be a funeral attendant. Kim admitted that he had previously worked in the military, trying to hide his past job as a doctor from her. Meanwhile, Vincent and Haeun were planning a celebration because Dongju had returned to their boarding house. At that time, Vincent wanted to organize a movie night so everyone could get to know each other better. Returning to Dongju and Kim, who are taking shelter from the pouring rain, Dongju is reminded of her childhood. Turns out, Dongju, who had been abandoned by her mother since birth, had to live independently and not rely on anyone. She felt sad because she was the only student not picked up by her parents. However, an old woman, the grandmother of her best friend, loved Dongju and brought her an umbrella. Not wanting to dwell on sadness, Dongju invited Kim to walk in the heavy rain. The next day, Dongju asked Kim to take her to her friend's house named Sora. There, Dongju cried in the car because Sora's grandmother, whom she had told Kim about the previous night, had passed away. While taking Dongju to the funeral home, Kim's friends saw him from a distance. The woman turned out to be Kim's ex-girlfriend. For some reason, their relationship, which was heading towards marriage, had ended suddenly. Kim seemed deeply hurt by his ex-girlfriend's mistake. On the other hand, Dongju was devastated by the death of Sora's grandmother, whom she considered her own grandmother. Even though she was also sad, Dongju realized she needed to comfort and support Sora. At the same time, Sora was heartbroken that her grandmother had left so quickly and regretted not fulfilling her last request to cut her nails. With tears in her eyes, Dongju helped guide the spirit of Sora's grandmother to rest peacefully. There, the grandmother expressed her gratitude for being well cared for by Sora and Dongju. Even though Dongju wasn't her biological granddaughter, she felt lucky because Sora's grandmother showed her love like a mother. Then, the grandmother asked Dongju to give her final message to Sora and hoped Dongju would find a life partner soon. After the funeral, Sora hugged a gift from her grandmother, and it was a blanket made with great love. A few days later, Dongju and Kim went to the cinema to meet Vincent and Haeun. However, Vincent and Haeun couldn't come due to an unexpected event. So, Kim and Dongju decided to have fun on their own. At that time, they played claw machines and other games. Before night fell, Dongju and Kim returned home, soaked from the rain. While they were talking, Kim was surprised by the arrival of his ex-girlfriend, Chung-ha, who also recognized Dongju from when they had helped homeless people. At that time, Dongju was curious about Kim's relationship with Chung-ha. Then, as Chung-ha reminisced about their past, it was clear she still hoped Kim would return to her and forget the painful things that had separated them. However, Kim remained distant and uninterested in rekindling their relationship. Feeling rejected, Chung-ha left Kim's office feeling empty. The next day, feeling worried about his niece's condition, the pastor looked for Dongju's address. He was relieved to find out that Dongju was staying in a cheap rental office owned by Vincent, whom he knew. After praying together, the pastor asked Kim to take good care of Dongju because he thought they were dating. Soon after, Kim invited Dongju to have lunch together after he finished his work. He also helped her change the code for the entrance to her boarding room. Then, Dongju asked who the woman was that met Kim the night before. Kim explained that Chung-ha was his first love, whom he met in college. At the same time, Kim received a message from Mr. Beck asking him to come to the shop. At that time, Mr. Beck wanted to repay Kim's kindness by giving him a bag because Kim had previously helped him cover up his job as a security guard in front of Dongju. Meanwhile, Dongju, who was initially excited about having lunch with Kim, felt disappointed after remembering what Kim said about his first love. On the other hand, Chung-ha met her mother, who also works as a doctor. At that time, Chung-ha's mother wanted to set her up with a successful businessman so that Chung-ha could forget about Kim, who had left her. Since Kim was hard to find, Chung-ha decided to invite him to lunch through his cheap rental job app. In that moment, Kim couldn't refuse a client's request because he didn't want to hurt his company's rating. Because of that, he had to cancel his plans with Dongju. Although she was a bit annoyed, after receiving Kim's call, Dongju decided to return to her boarding house. On the way, she saw Chung-ha with Kim at a restaurant. Kim was very surprised to see that his client was Chung-ha. There, Kim asked Chung-ha not to use the job app to meet him again. Misunderstanding the situation and thinking Kim and Chung-ha were dating, Dongju accepted Haeun's invitation to lunch. At that moment, he was happy to see Dongju, as it was his chance to get closer to her. While eating, they both noticed Kim having a small argument with a young man. Not wanting Kim to see her with Haeun, Dongju said she had something important to do and tried to leave. However, he asked Kim to take Dongju to her destination. On the way, Dongju became more annoyed with Kim for not being honest about his lunch with Chung-ha. Even when she arrived at the funeral home, Dongju still felt upset in front of her manager. Meanwhile, Sora, who was also Dongju's friend, gave a gift to manager Il-sab to thank him for helping send her grandmother to heaven peacefully. Turns out, Sora seems to have feelings for Il-sab, thinking he doesn't have a partner yet. Elsewhere, while working with the spirit of an old woman, Dongju received a request to replace the funeral photo with a picture from when the woman was young. Although it was difficult to get permission, a family member agreed with Dongju's idea and took a photo of the old woman from her house in the countryside. The hospital's location near the funeral home allowed Chungha to see Kim leaving with Dongju late at night. Because Dongju kept teasing Kim about his lunch with Chungha, Kim finally explained that he was just doing the job Chungha had hired him for. He didn't want any misunderstandings, so they made up. After getting the photo, Kim and Dongju decided to return to Seoul. Unfortunately, their car rolled over in the middle of the road because Kim didn't see a pothole. Since it was late, they couldn't get help to return to the city. Then, Kim carried Dongju, who had bruises on her legs, and they stayed overnight at the client's house with the owner's permission. At that time, Kim told Dongju that he had actually worked as a doctor, while he helped bandage her sprained leg. Even though it was a bit awkward because they had to stay in the same room, they both eventually fell asleep until the next day. There, Dongju learned that Kim was very lonely and needed someone to listen to him. After several hours, they arrived back in Seoul after Kim managed to repair his damaged car. Meanwhile, Chungha kept trying to get information from Vincent about where Kim had gone the night before. Thanks to Dongju's help, the funeral for her client went smoothly. In the evening, Dongju visited Kim's office to chat and enjoy macarons, but they were both surprised by Chungha's arrival. Because of that, Dongju chose to leave after noticing Chungha was angry while discussing a past issue with Kim. After Dongju left, Chungha realized someone else had heard their conversation. She was talking about the change in Kim's attitude, who still felt guilty about the death of his younger brother, Junho. The scene then shows the tragic incident from that night, hinting that it has something to do with Junho's request to Dongju about a ring. Back to Chungha, who left the cheap job rental office while crying. The next day, Kim met Dongju when she was about to exercise. Kim apologized for canceling their macaron eating event due to Chungha's arrival. Meanwhile, Sora was still feeling excited because she kept thinking about manager Il Sob, whom she believed was her future soulmate. She started asking Dongju about Il Sob's background. The next day, Vincent took Kim to church because he seemed troubled and needed to pray for peace. Coincidentally, Dongju was also at the same church meeting her uncle. They talked about her work, mentioning that she still had 9 bodies left to deliver. Dongju also asked her uncle about the meaning of a man's first love, showing that she was still thinking about it and feeling jealous because Chungha was Kim's first love. The pastor advised Dongju that Kim was actually a good man for her, even though she seemed unsure at the time. It turned out that the priest and Vincent had arranged for the 4 of them to have lunch at a cafe near the church. After eating and about to say goodbye, Vincent noticed some children participating in activities at the church after school. At that time, one boy named Joseph seemed less enthusiastic. After investigating, it was found that Joseph had lost his father and didn't get much attention from his mother, who had to work all day. This story reminded Dongju of her own life, having lost her mother when she was a baby. To cheer her up, Kim ate a leftover macaron from the previous night at the cheap job rental office. He then stopped his car on the side of the road because Dongju received a message to return to the office. Meanwhile, Sora was annoyed seeing a man publicly humiliating Il Sob. She couldn't accept that the man she liked was being treated badly. Suspicious that he might already have a girlfriend, Sora asked Dongju about it again. When Dongju arrived in front of the funeral home, Chungha approached her to apologize for the previous night's incident. Chungha explained that she and Kim used to date and now wanted to fix their relationship. She seemed anxious about Dongju's presence, as Dongju was warm and friendly, qualities most men dream of. Elsewhere, Kim smiled when he heard Joseph's story from Mr. Beck. At that time, Kim imagined that if his younger brother were still alive, he would be the same age as Joseph. The pastor learned from a church report that Joseph had not left a note of hope on the paper the pastor distributed in the past few weeks. The pastor suspected that Joseph no longer believed in God because his wishes had never been granted. One of Joseph's wishes was to see the beauty of the stars clearly, but he couldn't do it alone. The priest decided to ask for help, hire cheap work, and involve Dongju. He hoped that Dongju could cheer up Joseph and have fun with Kim. At the campsite, Kim and Dongju worked together to set up the tent. Some tourists even thought they were a couple. As night fell, Joseph finally enjoyed the stars shining brightly. He had been longing for this moment to ease his sadness over his father's death. Joseph always remembered his mother's words that his father would watch over their family as a star. Although they were tired, Kim and Dongju's efforts paid off because they made Joseph smile again. In that moment, Dongju was amazed by how well Kim treated children and understood their habits. She asked where he learned all that. Kim couldn't hide his sadness when he told her that he had a younger brother named Junho, whom he loved very much. Junho had an accident when he met Kim at the market near their house. At that time, Haeun, who was on night duty, witnessed the accident. A few days before the accident, Junho had asked Kim for a ring to give to Chungha as a proposal. Unfortunately, on the day Kim planned to propose to Chungha, he realized he had left the ring at home. Kim asked Junho to bring the ring, and Junho was eager to visit the same place to see the stars more clearly. Because Kim didn't answer his call, Junho decided to follow him to the hospital, even though it was raining. Unfortunately, Junho died in an accident on the way and was taken to the hospital where Kim worked. This is the story Kim shared with Dongju. Kim thought that Junho's spirit wasn't at peace because he still had anger. However, Dongju assured him that Junho's spirit had no hatred. Now, Dongju's presence in Kim's life was very meaningful, as they both felt comfortable with each other. Later, Dongju and Kim tried to persuade Joseph to stay one more night at the campsite, but Joseph refused because he didn't want to leave his mother for too long. After breakfast, they packed up to return to the city. There, Kim secretly took photos of Dongju, capturing her natural beauty. The next day, the pastor welcomed them back in front of the church and was relieved to see Joseph smiling. At that time, Dongju and Kim looked happy and blushed when Joseph mentioned that they actually wanted to stay another night. There, Vincent noticed that Kim came home with a happy face, as if the sadness of losing Junho had disappeared. He suspected that Dongju was the one who cheered Kim up. As night fell, Dongju checked every message on her phone, hoping for a message from Kim. She felt happy when Kim sent a message just to say goodnight. However, Kim hid his growing closeness to Dongju from Haeun to protect his friend's feelings since Haeun liked Dongju. Hearing Haeun's words, Kim realized that he and Dongju might actually be in love. The next day, Dongju waited for the right moment to meet Kim in front of his office. Kim greeted her and offered her a ride to the funeral home. While directing traffic, Kim encountered Chungha's mother. She insinuated that Kim was a young man who didn't know what to do because he left Chungha and his profession. She considered his current life very sad. She even recorded his activities and showed them to Chungha. It was known that Chungha didn't get along with her mother due to her habit of always changing partners. That day, Chungha decided to leave her house to avoid more arguments about marriage. The only place she could think of was Kim's cheap job rental office. Meanwhile, Dongju, coming home from work, checked if Kim was in his office. At that time, Kim was waiting for her and invited her to eat. However, their second date failed again because Chungha arrived and insisted on staying at Vincent's boarding house. Unfortunately, Kim couldn't refuse because Chungha seemed to need a place to stay. Upon knowing that, Dongju felt disappointed and had many questions in her heart. Out of compassion, Vincent allowed Chungha to stay, even though Kim had advised her to stay in a hotel. At that moment, Chungha still couldn't accept Kim's decision to end their 10-year romance. Then, she remembered an incident from several months ago. While working in the emergency room, she encountered two patients who had been in an accident. This incident made Kim unable to forgive Chungha because she didn't help Junho, who was one of the patients. Chungha later realized that the accident victim was Junho. Kim understood that it wasn't entirely her fault because, as a doctor, she couldn't choose which patient to save. Despite her pleas to rebuild their relationship, Kim still ignored her. That night, Chungha couldn't sleep and cried over her memories with Kim, which she still had on her phone. She suspected that Kim liked Dongju, which is why he wouldn't accept her love anymore. The next day, Chungha gave Dongju a ride to work. She wanted to show Dongju that she and Kim had a dinner appointment that night. Hearing this, Dongju was upset because she also liked Kim and felt blocked by Chungha's sudden reappearance. Throughout the day, Dongju felt conflicted, unsure whether to give up or keep fighting for Kim's love. But she knew that Kim wanted to forget Chungha. Meanwhile, Sora's increasingly bold behavior in approaching her manager, Il Sab, annoyed Dongju. There, Dongju wanted Sora to find a man who suited her better because Il Sab was already close to another woman. Today, Dongju was given the task of delivering a young girl's body. She asked if the girl's last wish had been fulfilled. The girl wanted Dongju to deliver a love letter to a classmate she admired, which was still in her school locker. With Dongju's help, the girl was able to leave peacefully, knowing her feelings were expressed. This love story made Dongju consider doing the same with Kim. After work, Dongju told Kim that she liked him but didn't have the courage to say it before. There, she asked if Kim still wanted to meet Chungha, who was waiting for him, hoping his love would be reciprocated. However, she was disappointed when Kim rejected her and seemed to be in a hurry to go somewhere. Feeling both disappointed and ashamed, Dongju couldn't help but cry on the side of the street. On the other hand, Chungha keeps calling Kim to remind him about their dinner plans. However, Kim was meeting with Chungha's mother, who offered him a place to use as a clinic if he returned to his old life. Chungha's mother realized that her daughter couldn't move on from Kim, whom she loved very much. Kim's refusal of the offer made Chungha's mother angry. She then called Chungha to tell her about the meeting with Kim and asked her to leave Vincent's boarding house because Kim had gently pushed her away. Meanwhile, feeling rejected by Kim, Dongju invited Sora and a friend to drink soju. Returning home drunk, Dongju met Haeun, who took her home. After getting a call from her mother, Chungha left Vincent's boarding house. She didn't expect Kim to leave her alone at the restaurant. The next day, when Dongju saw Kim, she hoped he would forget what she said last night. At that time, she didn't expect much anymore after being rejected by Kim. Feeling heartbroken, Dongju confided in her uncle at church. The pastor felt sorry for her because she had thought Kim liked her, making the rejection even harder to accept. In that moment, Dongju couldn't stop thinking about Kim. Meanwhile, Kim was still working on directing traffic when he met Dongju's ex-boyfriend, Byung-soo. There, Byung-soo told Kim that his efforts had really helped him. After breaking up with Dongju, his life had become calmer. Byung-soo mentioned that he had grown tired of Dongju's constant complaints, which he found annoying. At the funeral home, manager Il-sa briefed the staff on their progress. Even though they had achieved the best customer satisfaction, there were still rival funeral homes in the Daesun area with higher ratings for their food service. Then they planned to investigate the competition. At that time, Dongju, who had only been working for a few months, was chosen for a special mission. The manager asked for help from the cheap job service to deliver and assist Dongju with reconnaissance. However, Kim don't accept the job due to his strained relationship with Dongju, so Vincent took the job instead. Together with Vincent, Dongju arrived at Daesun's funeral home. Pretending to look for a place to end his life, Vincent acted convincingly. Vincent was very selective, wanting to ensure that the funeral process would be handled properly, including the food for the mourners. Meanwhile, the female manager, not suspecting anything, gave him the usual food served at their funeral home. At that time, Dongju was impressed by Vincent's ability to analyze food composition, and they managed to uncover the secret of Daesun's funeral home, which was well regarded by many people. Meanwhile, Mr. Beck visited Kim's office. He brought food for Dongju, thinking Kim was in the same study group as his daughter. There, Mr. Beck made kimchi for Kim because he believed Kim was a good man who could take care of Dongju. Besides that, Kim had helped him keep his job as a security guard a secret. When they arrived at the office, Vincent and Dongju were visited by a girl named Deepening who asked for help finding a replacement family for her wedding ceremony. Dongju recognized Deepening because she had previously used the funeral home services. Since there were no female employees, Dongju volunteered to help Vincent. Meanwhile, Kim met Dongju to deliver items her father had entrusted to him. At that time, Kim didn't say much, knowing that Dongju might still be upset. Then, while enjoying the kimchi made by Mr. Beck, Vincent mentioned that on Sunday, Kim had a job as a wedding guest with Dongju. Vincent was angry because Kim refused the job again. Kim then left without giving a clear answer about whether he would take the job or not. Dongju opened a package from her father containing lots of food and daily necessities. Mr. Beck said that Kim was a good young man because he was friendly and cared about older people by giving them rides and keeping them in his thoughts. Unable to keep it to himself any longer, Haeun finally expressed his love for Dongju. Upon hearing that, Dongju was surprised because they had rarely communicated. Unlike her, Haeun found motivation in life just by seeing her face. Dongju appreciated his honesty but couldn't accept his love because she already liked someone else. Even though Haeun acts normal in front of Dongju, he expresses his frustration to Vincent and Kim about the man who has captured Dongju's heart. Haeun's sadness was slightly relieved when he received news of a promotion to detective at the Bongsu Regional Police Department. On his first day as a detective, Haeun received guidance from his senior on several successfully handled cases. He was then assigned to a hospital to investigate a case, where he met Chung-ha, whom he had seen before while accompanying an accident victim. The day of Deemin's wedding ceremony finally arrived. At that time, Dongju was introduced to Deemin's future husband as Soyoung, Deemin's best friend who had just returned from abroad and owned a fashion business. Upon hearing that, Deemin's future husband was curious about Dongju, but then someone took her hand. It was Kim. There, Dongju was relieved because Kim's presence meant they could pretend to be a couple. Vincent and the pastor also attended the event because Deemin had invited them. Unfortunately, Dongju's ex-boyfriend was also a guest and saw Dongju and Kim holding hands as if they were dating. At that moment, Byung-soo couldn't believe what he saw. He eavesdropped on Dongju and the bride and discovered that she was pretending to be Deemin's friend with a rented boyfriend. There, Byung-soo and Kim ended up arguing in the restroom because he accused Kim of being unprofessional for dating Dongju after their breakup. What really made Kim lose his temper was when Byung-soo insulted Dongju's profession as a funeral attendant. There, Byung-soo called Dongju a fraud, revealing the secret of Kim and Dongju's cheap work service. Fortunately, the commotion was noticed by the guests only after the wedding ceremony was over. Even though it didn't ruin Deemin's wedding, Dongju apologized for causing a scene and potentially damaging Deemin's reputation. Soon after, Dongju treated the wound on Kim's face, feeling guilty because it was all due to her ex-boyfriend. However, Kim apologized for hurting Dongju's feelings for the sake of their cheap job service. Then, he finally expressed his true feelings, admitting that he had been pretending not to like Dongju, even though he really wanted to hold her hand as his girlfriend. That night felt long for Dongju as Kim gave her their first kiss. After celebrating their second anniversary, Dongju told Kim that she would be going out of town the next day for a funeral. She had the opportunity to help with the funeral of a husband and wife who died close to each other. Dongju was impressed by how the old man treated his wife even after she died, especially when she learned that he died while picking persimmons for her. Now, Dongju has only 5 more bodies to deliver. Not wanting to lose any time with his girlfriend, Kim followed Dongju out of town and gave her a bouquet of flowers. When they returned home, he picked persimmons for Dongju because she had been talking about them during the trip. There, Kim kept their relationship a secret from Haeun. When he met Haeun at the convenience store, he treated him because he felt uneasy. Kim was surprised when Haeun mentioned that he liked Dongju first. Meanwhile, Sora, who liked manager Il-sab a lot, decided to work at the hospital next to the funeral home. By accident, Sora overheard Il-sab struggling to find information about his friend in the hospital. Then, she offered to help by using her access as a nurse. On the other hand, to bring the two families closer, Vincent planned a dinner and invited Dongju and the pastor. After the dinner, Dongju and Kim continued their date at a romantic place. Unexpectedly, Chung-ha's mother, Mrs. Miran, saw Kim and Dongju being affectionate in front of a cafe. The next day, Mrs. Miran met Chung-ha, who had been staying at a hotel for several days. Mrs. Miran was very worried about Chung-ha, who was still sad after breaking up with Kim. There, she tried to suggest that Kim might be happier with another woman, but Chung-ha refused to listen. Tired of her mother, Chung-ha said she didn't want to see her again and left, even though Mrs. Miran seemed to be having a headache. One night, Mrs. Miran became unconscious and died due to a ruptured blood vessel. Dongju was shocked when she checked the client files and realized that the body was Chung-ha's mother. Then, she called Kim to tell him the sad news. Kim already knew from a school alumni message chain, but Chung-ha now felt deep regret. Chung-ha regretted telling her mother she didn't want to see her again, and now her words had come true because her mother had passed away. The spirit of Mrs. Miran accepted her death and recognized Dongju as the funeral attendant who could convey her last wishes. There, Mrs. Miran asked Dongju to help Chung-ha find happiness with Kim. Upon hearing that Dongju felt this request was too selfish because she also liked Kim. So, in front of mourning friends and relatives, Chung-ha appeared strong, not even shedding a tear. The only person Chung-ha was waiting for was Kim, but Vincent said that Kim couldn't come to the funeral home. Realizing how important Kim's support was for Chung-ha, Dongju encouraged him to attend the funeral despite her own discomfort. She urged Kim to show concern for his ex-girlfriend. The next day, Kim came to pay his respects to Mrs. Miran, not wanting to regret it later as Dongju had said. Chung-ha only broke down in tears when Kim was by her side, realizing that they no longer had a relationship. Kim limited himself from hugging Chung-ha to protect Dongju's feelings, Some of Chung-ha's old friends regretted the end of her relationship with Kim, thinking they were an ideal couple. Dongju overheard this gossip and thought about Mrs. Miran's request. In front of her mother's grave, Chung-ha promised to recover from her sadness soon so her mother could rest in peace without worrying about her. On the other hand, the mystery regarding Haeyeon, who was the key witness to Junho's accident, was finally revealed. The man who hit Junho was Haeyeon's older brother, Sol Hyun-young, who was driving drunk at the time. Now, Sol Hyun-young is still in a coma in the ICU where Sora works. At that time, Haeyeon discovered that the boy who was the victim was Kim's younger brother when he saw a photo of Kim's family in Vincent's office. Haeyeon also learned that Kim previously worked as a doctor. After discovering that Junho was Kim's younger brother, Dongju remembered the ring Junho had been thinking about. She realized that Kim might want to give the ring to Chung-ha. In the evening, Dongju gave the ring to Kim and apologized for avoiding Junho's spirit when she first saw him because she was scared. Kim was touched because Junho had left a final message about the ring. There, Dongju also mentioned that on the day of Junho's accident, she saw a policeman who also knew about the ring. Haeyeon felt that the world was very small because the family affected by his older brother's mistake was Kim's family, who had been kind to him. 2 years after Junho's death, his parents visited the place to commemorate his death and cried because the person who hit Junho had not been properly compensated. At that time, Kim's mother told him to live a normal life and forget his guilt. One day, Dongju realized that her ability to talk to spirits didn't work when delivering the bodies of people who had committed great sins. According to the pastor, someone who ends their life or kills another person doesn't deserve a blessing. Meanwhile, Haeyeon visited his unconscious older brother in the hospital. The scene shifts to 2 years ago, just before the incident, when Haeyeon had an argument with Sol Hyun-young. In the present, Kim saw a jacket being sold in a shop and decided to buy it as a gift for Haeyeon. When giving the gift, he also wanted to tell Haeyeon about his relationship with Dongju, who is now his girlfriend. But there, Haeyeon, who was still thinking about Junho's case, said that Kim didn't need to worry about his feelings right now. At that moment, Haeyeon wanted to admit that his older brother was the one who hit Junho, but he was still too afraid to say it. When they were going home, a friend of Haeyeon recognized Kim. They talked about Junho's case, and the detective mentioned he was handling it. There, Kim asked if there was a policeman at the scene during the accident, but the detective said there were no witnesses, as he found out about the accident while on patrol. When Kim visited the person who hit Junho, he was surprised to see Haeyeon there, taking care of a patient named Sol Hyun-young. A few days later, Sol Hyun-young was reported to have died. Shortly after, Haeyeon shared the sad news and apologized to Kim. He hoped that Kim would accept Junho's death now that the person who hit him was dead. Sol Hyun-young's funeral was held at the funeral home where Dongju worked. Kim begged Dongju to talk to the spirit of the person who hit his brother, but Dongju suspected she couldn't talk to Sol Hyun-young because he had committed a sin. Unexpectedly, while caring for Sol Hyun-young's body, the room changed and Dongju was able to talk to his spirit. Even though he was skeptical, Sol Hyun-young admitted that he was the one who hit Junho while driving drunk. At that time, Dongju gave him the chance to explain the accident or share any messages he needed to convey. There, she grew more curious because it seemed like Sol Hyun-young wanted to cover up someone else's mistake. When storing Sol Hyun-young's ashes, Haeyeon was surprised because Dongju gave him a pack of Sol Hyun-young's favorite cigarettes. At that moment, Haeyeon had forgotten such a small detail. From Sol Hyun-young's ex-girlfriend, Dongju obtained photo evidence showing that on the night of the incident, he was in the passenger seat. At that time, Dongju decided to investigate alone and didn't dare to tell Kim. The next day, Mr. Beck saw Dongju and Kim in the same car. Mr. Beck was surprised because Dongju had said she was living in Noryangjin, but it seemed like she was actually close to the cheap job rental office. Upon knowing that, Vincent tried to cover up Dongju's job as a funeral attendant. After realizing that Dongju was keeping her job a secret from her father, Vincent introduced himself as Uncle Kim, saying that Kim was dating Dongju. Mr. Beck was relieved after hearing Vincent's explanation that Dongju stopped by his office between tutoring sessions. Mr. Beck felt better because he knew Kim as a hardworking and polite young man, so he had no problem with him being his son-in-law. Meanwhile, Dongju told Kim about the photo that Sol Hyun-young sent the night of the accident. After knowing about that, Kim took this to the police and became more convinced that something was wrong because the police hadn't seen the photo. Junho's case had minimal evidence since there was no car dashboard footage, or nearby CCTV footage. It turned out that Haeun had been hiding the photo evidence because he was the real perpetrator of the crash. Haeun panicked when Kim realized that Sol Hyun-young wasn't the culprit. At that time, Kim wanted to continue investigating to find out who was truly responsible and deserved to be punished. Then, he asked Haeun for help in reopening Junho's case file, hoping to find missed clues. But there, Haeun, not wanting to be caught in his lies, argued that he couldn't share confidential police information with ordinary people, so Kim shouldn't expect much from him. After 2 years had passed, while passing by the crime scene, Haeun remembered that he had actually hit Junho because he was arguing with Sol Hyun-young. Not wanting to fail as a police officer, Haeun moved Sol Hyun-young's body to the driver's seat. At that time, Junho regained consciousness and asked Haeun for help. However, instead of calling an ambulance, Haeun cleaned his tracks and fingerprints at the scene. The car immediately hit a pole. Because of that, Sol Hyun-young suffered serious injuries. Before fleeing, Haeun took the memory card from the car's dashboard camera, making it seem like Sol Hyun-young was the sole perpetrator. For 2 years, after being transferred to the Traffic Affairs Department, Haeun deleted all data related to Junho's case. One day, while going home from work, he saw Dongju coming to church late at night. Curious, he overheard her conversation with the pastor about Junho's case. Realizing that Dongju was getting close to the truth, Haeun confronted Dongju about what she knew about Sol Hyun-young. Under the influence of alcohol, Haeun threatened Dongju to stop interfering in his business. Dongju couldn't do anything when Haeun strangled her because there was no one else around and Kim was still on the road. Haeun's sudden violent behavior was due to his traumatic past, where he saw a fight between his parents that resulted in his mother's death. Suddenly, Haeun realized and regretted what he had done to Dongju. At the right moment, Kim arrived home and found Dongju in a helpless state. Soon after, he helped her and called the police. On the other hand, Haeun ran away to escape Kim's pursuit, not knowing what to do because he knew his crimes would be exposed. At that moment, Haeun, who was feeling desperate, considered jumping from the roof of a building. He thought he had nothing left to live for since his life and family were ruined. However, Kim stopped Haeun, telling him that he needed to face his actions and not escape through death. Eventually, Haeun was sent to prison for hurting Dongju. After some time, Dongju gathered the courage to visit Haeun in prison. She conveyed a message from Sol Hyun-young, saying that they should live happily and not feel guilty about their family's problems. Haeun was touched because Sol Hyun-young, until the end, wanted to protect him and let Haeun have a normal life. Then, Haeun finally admitted that he was the one who hit Junho and asked Dongju to retrieve the recording evidence stored in his room. At the police station, Kim watched the recording that proved Haeun was the one who hit Junho. It took Kim several days to recover after Haeun confessed. If only Haeun had confessed 2 years ago, the suffering of Kim's family wouldn't have lasted so long. Kim was finally able to let Junho go after dreaming of him and hearing Junho say he was at peace. After several months of working as a funeral attendant, Dongju now had only one more body to deliver. On the other hand, the pastor read an article about an apartment fire decades ago, which might have something to do with Dongju's job and abilities. Soon after, Mr. Beck invited Vincent and Kim to his house to help make a lot of kimchi. At that time, Mr. Beck hoped that Dongju would be honest about her relationship with Kim, which was getting serious. However, Mr. Beck had to leave before dinner because he got a call to cover a friend's shift as a security guard. Shortly after, Mr. Beck told Dongju that he was going to visit a friend who had an accident. When Kim drove Mr. Beck to work, he entrusted Dongju to Kim, believing that Kim could make Dongju happy since she had lacked a mother's attention since she was little. The next day, Dongju saw her father rushing to the apartment building. Curious, she followed him and was surprised to find out that he had been working as a security guard to earn extra income besides running the bag shop. Mr. Beck apologized for hiding this job from Dongju. Soon after, she immediately went to find the pastor, wanting to know if he had known about her father's job. Dongju felt useless for letting her father work so hard while she lied about tutoring. She felt exhausted from working as a mortician and wanted to go home to take care of her aging father. Then, Dongju submitted a resignation letter to manager Ilsab, deciding to focus on fulfilling her father's dream of becoming a civil servant. On the same day, she told her father that she had decided to come home, but only if he stopped working as a security guard. When she was about to say goodbye to Kim, Dongju had a bad feeling after accidentally breaking a glass. Shortly after, she received news that Mr. Beck had an accident at work after saving a pregnant woman. Dongju never expected to lose her father that day. Mr. Beck's death was seen as heroic because he also saved the lives of a woman and her 3 newborn triplets. Many mourners came to pay their respects because Mr. Beck was known as a good person. Condolences came from all over the country. At that time, Dongju cried in front of the pastor, not expecting that the last body she would deliver would be her own father's. She had so much to say to him in their remaining time together. Tears flowed as Dongju remembered how her father had cared for her alone since she was a baby. They had shared joyful days together, and now, after 25 years, they were separated by death. Dongju had to let her father be happy in the afterlife with her mother. Finally, she completed the task of delivering all the bodies as the pastor had suggested. But she keeps thinking about the real reason behind this task. It turned out that on the day Dongju was born, there was a fire in an apartment. The fire victims showed their good side by helping each other, and in the end, no one was hurt. As a reward for their kindness, they received a small miracle in their last moments or in the lives of their closest family members through Dongju's hands, whether by coincidence or not. Kim even met Dongju's father when they were in the hospital after the fire broke out. After some time, Dongju decided to go back to her job as a funeral worker because she realized it was helpful to many people. And she even experienced a miracle that allowed her to be with her father in his last moments. Dongju's ability to talk to spirits has now disappeared because someone else has taken over that role. It seems that this man is now the one who needs to fulfill the wishes of the deceased to avoid bad luck. Meanwhile, Kim went back to his career as a doctor, working at a hospital close to the funeral home. The love story between Dongju and Kim has a happy ending. The film ends. The moral lesson from this film is always check who's behind the wheel before blaming someone for a hit and run, because you never know when a ghost might be your alibi. And if you ever find yourself working in a funeral home, be prepared for love, mysteries, and the occasional awkward family dinner.